Pay close attention to this security camera footage. At the edge of East St. Louis, a CCTV camera mounted in front of a small grocery store captured exactly 27 seconds at 5:42 p.m. on September 12th. You see a 39-year-old man step out of the store with a bag of groceries in hand. An elderly man, hunched back, walking slowly, hands trembling, drops his bag right in front of him. The younger man stops. He bends down, picks up the bag, and carries it for the older man. The two stand side by side for a few seconds, exchanging a brief word or two. Then the elderly man points toward the parking lot behind the store. Both of them step out of the camera frame together, heading into an area with no remaining camera coverage. That was the last time Ethan Parker was seen alive. 5 days later, at 7:10 a.m., workers discovered his body inside an abandoned cold storage warehouse. At first, most people assumed this was a random disappearance, a botched robbery, wrong place, wrong time. Wrong. This was not random. This was not a robbery. And it did not begin in that parking lot behind the store. Ethan Parker, a 39-year-old freelance electrician, made a familiar stop after work, dropping into the small grocery store on the edge of East St. Louis, as he had done for years before heading home to Belleville. No criminal record, no history of trouble, no record of conflicts. Ethan lived in repeatable and predictable routines. Daytime jobs, a few simple purchases in the afternoon, home before dark. He was familiar to the store clerks, familiar to the regulars who came through during peak hours. And like many others in the area, Ethan had a habit of stopping to help when he saw someone in difficulty. Perhaps it was just reflex. Perhaps it was courtesy learned over years of living and working among familiar faces. Robbery? Random? Wrong place, wrong time. A small tragedy in an area already accustomed to worse. That was how things were usually understood in those first hours when an ordinary person vanished. That was also the context no one questioned at 5:42 p.m. on September 12th, when Ethan stepped out of the store and saw an elderly man drop his bag right in front of him. That man was Arthur Cole, 72 years old according to initial statements, thin build, hunched back, slow gait, trembling hands when bending down. Arthur's appearance raised no sense of threat. He looked like so many other elderly people who appeared around the area. People with no clear fixed address, no car parked in the main lot, leaving no specific trace in local records. Ethan bent down to help pick up the bag, agreed to carry it a short distance when Arthur pointed toward the auxiliary parking lot behind the store. Wrong place, wrong time. A decision that lasted only a few seconds, the kind of moment no one stops to remember. The auxiliary lot was hidden behind the building, out of view of the store's only front-facing camera, connected to a narrow path leading to a less traveled area, where rows of abandoned warehouses stretched along the Mississippi River had become a familiar part of the landscape. The CCTV system around the store was patchy and disjointed, each camera operating independently, leaving long gaps between frames. Ethan followed Arthur out of frame, the two walking side by side toward the auxiliary lot, and in those few brief seconds, they became two ordinary figures leaving the camera's view, drawing no attention, leaving no sign of anything unusual. To anyone looking back later, that moment could be explained in countless simple ways. One person helping another, an elderly man being assisted, a minor incident not worth remembering. That was the most natural assumption. It was also the most dangerous assumption. Nothing in the initial minutes after Ethan Parker vanished suggested this was an impulsive act or a random crime, because his leaving the camera frame was only the final link in a structure that had existed for years prior. A cross-state illegal organ trafficking network, operating like an underground business with clear role divisions and tight discipline. At the outermost layer were the spotters, individuals tasked with approaching targets without drawing attention, without leaving traces of violence, and most importantly, getting the victim to voluntarily leave their safe space. At the next layer was the takedown team, people who appeared at precisely the right moment, fast enough to subdue, sedate, and transport the victim in a matter of seconds before anyone noticed anything wrong. Then came the holding facility, usually old abandoned sites with good isolation conditions, where victims were kept alive for a short window, just long enough to complete the necessary preparations. And at the deepest layer were the black market medical leads, individuals with specialized knowledge, ready to perform unauthorized surgical interventions on pre-arranged schedules based on recipient demand and supply availability. In that structure, Arthur Cole was not a random link but a long-time spotter, a role requiring patience, people-reading skills, and an almost perfect cover. The image of a frail elderly man, moving slowly, hands trembling when bending down, not only lowered the guard of those around him, but triggered a familiar social reflex: help without asking questions. Arthur did not target people with rigid schedules, large families, or fixed jobs. He selected victims based on criteria, honed over years of operation, including still good physical condition, no easily detectable chronic illnesses, freelance work that meant disappearance for the first few hours, would not immediately be noticed, and no close family ties strong enough to trigger an urgent search. Ethan Parker met every one of those criteria, not because he did anything wrong, but because his life was too ordinary, too quiet to make noise when interrupted. After leaving the front camera's view, Ethan was not taken away in chaos or overt violence. He was sedated and transported, according to a process repeated many times with other victims, a process designed to minimize risk and maximize control time. By 6:10 p.m. on September 12th, Ethan had been brought to the holding site, a location that appeared in none of his usual daily records, where he was kept in a semi-conscious state, just enough to maintain basic life functions. Between September 13th and 14th, biological checks were conducted, not to treat but to confirm suitability for forced organ donation, including blood type, compatibility, and organ condition. That Ethan could not be released did not stem from panic or a snap decision, but from the rigid logic of the network. Once a victim had seen the holding location and the people involved, release meant risking exposure of the entire structure. In that system, people were not seen as individuals with histories and relationships, but as sets of biological conditions that either met or failed to meet a pre-scheduled appointment. Ethan was not killed because he resisted, nor because he saw something unusual, but because from the moment he bent down to pick up the bag for Arthur Cole, he had entered a chain of decisions with a predetermined end, a chain in which kindness was not a factor considered, and life existed only as long as it still fit the plans of those behind it. In the days leading up to September 12th, Arthur Cole had been appearing around the grocery store on the edge of East St. Louis, with a frequency regular enough not to draw attention but frequent enough to observe. Each visit occurring in the same late afternoon time frame, when customer volume was steady, staff were tired, and minor behaviors were easily overlooked. Arthur did not approach randomly, but spent time watching regular customers, noting who came alone, who tended to stop and help others, who was not in a hurry, and who responded with social instinct rather than suspicion. Among them, Ethan Parker stood out as a potential target, not because he was different, but because he was so consistent, stopping by the store several times a week, always around after work hours, never with anyone accompanying him, never rushing to leave, and frequently pausing when he saw someone in difficulty. Arthur had tested small interactions prior, nods of acknowledgement, standing near the checkout counter, brief moments sufficient to confirm that Ethan was the type who would respond with assistance rather than doubt. Once certain, Arthur began setting the trap according to a simple script that had been repeated many times in the past, because its very simplicity was what made it effective. On the afternoon of September 12th, Arthur carried a pre-arranged bag of groceries, designed to drop easily, chose a position right in front of the main exit, where the front-facing camera captured clearest but recorded no audio, and waited for the moment Ethan stepped out. The act of dropping the bag was not clumsiness, but a deliberate action, calculated to create a brief moment that compelled the other person to react. When Ethan bent down to help, Arthur did not rush, but slowly pointed toward the auxiliary parking lot behind the store, explaining that his car was there, a reasonable enough request not to be refused. especially since the distance was only a few dozen yards. This auxiliary lot had been pre-selected because it lay outside the direct view of the main camera, obscured by the corner of the building and industrial trash bins, while also offering a quick exit to a lightly trafficked road. Here, Arthur's accomplices had already positioned a vehicle, a white van with no license plates, parked toward the back, blending in with the old delivery trucks that frequently appeared in the area, not conspicuous enough to attract notice. At exactly 5:44 p.m., as Ethan and Arthur entered the camera-blind area, two other individuals approached from behind in the pre-calculated positions, one holding the shoulders, the other using a fast-acting aerosol sedative aimed at the face and neck, a method chosen because it produced no loud noise and required no prolonged struggle. The entire restraint process took less than 20 seconds, fast enough that no one from the front of the store noticed, and clean enough to leave no obvious signs of violence at the scene. Ethan lost the ability to resist almost immediately. His body was dragged into the back of the van, the sliding door closed, and the vehicle left the auxiliary lot just seconds later, merging into the sparse late-afternoon traffic. Arthur did not board the van at the same time, but separated in the opposite direction, leaving the area on foot via a familiar pedestrian path, a detail meant to create the impression that he was merely a passerby unconnected to the disappearance that had just occurred. The van followed a pre-scouted route, avoiding major intersections with dense traffic cameras, heading north and crossing the city boundary in a short time. The destination was an abandoned cold storage warehouse in Granite City, once used for frozen food storage years earlier, but long since shut down, no longer connected to official power, no security cameras, and virtually no foot traffic at night. The site had been chosen because its natural insulation limited sound, the thick, heavy warehouse doors were easy to control for entry and exit, and it sat in an old industrial area, where a van coming and going drew no attention whatsoever. When the van stopped, Ethan was taken inside through a side entrance, no natural light, no signage, no indication this had ever been an operational space. The door closed behind him, severing Ethan from any connection to the space he had just left, completing the final phase of a plan prepared over many days prior, a sequence of actions in which every small detail, from the timing of Arthur's appearances to the parking position and escape route, had been arranged to ensure that the moment Ethan left the front camera frame was also the moment he vanished from every familiar structure of everyday observation. What was later reconstructed from the camera systems showed that the entire sequence of events did not exist in one continuous recording, but was fragmented into disjointed clips, each camera capturing only a very small portion of the chain of events, enough to create a sense of understanding while simultaneously concealing what had really happened. The grocery store's front-facing camera, fixed above the main entrance, recorded exactly 27 seconds of interaction between Ethan Parker and Arthur Cole, beginning from the moment Ethan stepped out the door until both left the frame to the right, where the auxiliary lot lay outside the shot. In this footage, there were no signs of struggle, no sudden movements, just an ordinary sequence of everyday behavior. One person bending to pick up a dropped bag, an elderly man waiting, and the two walking side by side out of frame, enough for anyone reviewing it to interpret as routine assistance. A second camera, positioned at an alley angle leading to the back of the store, had lower resolution and a narrow field of view, capturing only a blurry moment for a few seconds when an arm swung up at the edge of the frame and a bag dropped to the ground. No clear faces, no identifiable individuals, not enough data to determine specific behavior, but enough to show a brief interruption before the frame went empty. A nearby traffic camera, several blocks from the store, recorded a white van leaving the area heading north at 6:02 p.m. Blending into the thinning late rush hour traffic, no clearly identifiable license plate, no standout exterior features, and nothing in that moment to distinguish it from dozens of other commercial vehicles that regularly used the route. When these recordings were first reviewed, a major misinterpretation of the case formed almost immediately. Arthur Cole was assumed to have vanished along with Ethan Parker, a reasonable assumption based on the fact that both left the front camera frame at the same time, and no footage showed Arthur returning. The absence of any report of a personal vehicle belonging to Arthur in the area, no car registered to him found in the main lot or on nearby streets, further reinforced the hypothesis that he too was a victim, possibly caught up in the same event that led to Ethan's disappearance. In those early hours, the lack of data from this patchwork camera system created an incomplete picture, where the gaps were far larger than what could be seen. While initial assumptions still revolved around the possibility that both men had been harmed, everything that occurred after leaving the front camera frame appeared in no publicly available footage whatsoever. Ethan, after being removed from the store area, was held in the abandoned cold storage warehouse in Granite City, a location with no surveillance cameras, no functioning alarm system, and virtually no nighttime traffic, where physical features like thick walls and heavy doors helped isolate sound and light from the surrounding environment. There, Ethan was kept alive with drugs and minimal medical measures, not for care but to stabilize basic biological functions for the short time required for the next steps in the unauthorized intervention process. During this period, no signal from Ethan's phone ever reappeared on any network, and no public camera captured his movement, causing visual tracking to come to a near-complete halt after 6:02 p.m. on September 12th. By the early morning hours of September 13th, Ethan died during the unauthorized medical procedure, an event recorded by neither camera nor monitoring device, leaving only biological and physical traces at the holding site. The organs had been removed and transported away before the body was abandoned, a sequence consistent with the modus operandi of illegal organ trafficking networks, where product is removed before the remainder of the scene is disposed of. Meanwhile, the initial CCTV clips continued to be reviewed repeatedly, each viewing reinforcing the early understanding of Arthur as someone who had also vanished, until a small technical detail began to undermine that assumption. When comparing footage across a wider area, investigators noticed a pair of shoes with a distinctive pattern and style, matching the shoes Arthur wore in the 27-second footage in front of the store, appearing in various other locations on public cameras around East St. Louis in the days prior, at times unrelated to shopping or ordinary personal activity. These appearances did not follow a fixed route, were not tied to a specific destination, but were scattered around areas with low camera density and multiple quick exits, indicating a purposeful movement pattern rather than random wandering. Arthur's presence at these locations in the week before September 12th, combined with the absence of any footage showing him being restrained or coerced at the store scene, gradually weakened the assumption that he was a second victim, and raised the possibility that his disappearance from the front camera frame was not the result of an abduction, but part of a calculated sequence designed to exploit the gaps in the area's disjointed surveillance system, where each camera told only a very small piece of the story and left the rest in darkness. The body was discovered at 7:10 a.m. on September 17th, when a crew of workers was sent to inspect an abandoned cold storage warehouse in Granite City after the new owner requested a condition check before releasing it, and inside a rear auxiliary compartment, they found the body of Ethan Parker in a state of decomposition consistent with the time frame of his disappearance. The forensic report clearly identified three key features: ligature marks on the wrists and ankles, indicating systematic restraint of the victim, residual anesthetic substances in the blood, and soft tissue, proving that life had been medically maintained for a certain period, and evidence of unauthorized surgical intervention, inconsistent with any legitimate emergency or therapeutic procedure, including incisions and organ damage performed under non-sterile conditions. Once the victim's identity was confirmed, the investigation was expanded and restructured around a 14-day timeline, beginning from the moment Ethan left the front-facing store camera frame. In the first 3 days, investigators focused on reconstructing the full CCTV timeline in the area, synchronizing timestamps across non-unified camera systems, from the store cameras, the alley camera, to the scattered traffic cameras around East St. Louis, in order to precisely determine the sequence of departure and the exact points where observation broke off. From day 4 to day 6, the focus shifted to tracing the route of the white van that appeared at 6:02 p.m., including comparison of vehicle images at larger intersections, cross-referencing with traffic data and private commercial cameras along routes heading north, thereby narrowing down the likely paths used to evade surveillance. Between Day 7 and Day 9, investigators analyzed data from burner phones detected via cell towers near the abandoned warehouse area, identifying short-term contact numbers, activation and deactivation times, as well as connections between these devices and other towers in the region, thereby clarifying the minimal but deliberate communication structure of the involved parties. From Day 10 to Day 12, a major breakthrough occurred when overlapping data showed that Arthur Cole had not vanished with Ethan, but continued to appear in video recordings and telecom signals at various other locations after September 12th, confirming that he was alive and actively moving, completely contradicting the initial assumption of a second victim. Cross-referencing images of Arthur's distinctive shoes, location data from public cameras, and minor cash transactions in the area solidified this conclusion, shifting Arthur from missing person to central suspect. In the final 2 days of the investigative cycle, from Day 13 to Day 14, simultaneous arrest warrants were executed against Arthur Cole and the accomplices identified through the communication chain and vehicle, concluding the initial tracing phase and moving the case into prosecution. The charges filed included kidnapping, murder, illegal organ trafficking, and conspiracy to commit organized crime, fully reflecting the constituent criminal acts proven by physical evidence, digital data, and forensic results. In the subsequent federal trials, the cross-state operational structure of the network, the specific roles of each defendant, and the connections between individual acts were clarified, resulting in life sentences plus stacked federal penalties that closed the legal phase of the case in a manner reflecting the severity and systematic nature of the crime committed. The direct aftermath of the case was not measured by the number of defendants or the length of sentences, but by the fact that a single 27-second CCTV clip, initially considered meaningless, became the central piece of evidence at trial, where every frame was played in slow motion, enlarged and analyzed to reconstruct the entire chain of events leading to Ethan Parker's death. That footage showed no violence, captured no moment of restraint or transport, but its very ordinariness carried decisive value. It confirmed the last time the victim was alive, pinpointed the exact moment of approach, and placed Arthur Cole in an irrefutable position within the sequence of actions. From what appeared to be a harmless image, an entire cross-state illegal organ trafficking network was exposed, triggering expanded federal investigations into other regions, sweeps of abandoned facilities, transport routes, and missing persons cases previously classified as voluntary departures, or of unknown cause. The social reverberations of the case spread far beyond a single courtroom, forcing the local community to reconsider seemingly safe everyday interactions, from helping strangers to how inherently vulnerable appearing figures are automatically deemed non-threatening. Law enforcement agencies simultaneously launched reviews of similar missing persons cases, particularly those involving freelance workers with no close family ties, and disappearances in areas with patchy surveillance systems where visual gaps had previously been overlooked. Looking back, the ultimate structure of the case did not rest on sophisticated tricks or elaborate plans, but on a simple repeatedly executed sequence, an act of kindness leading to approach, the approach leading to leaving a safe space, and leaving that space, leading to complete disappearance from every familiar monitoring structure. Throughout the entire process, CCTV played no role in prevention or rescue. It performed its sole function recording the final moment Ethan Parker was alive, standing in an ordinary setting, performing a familiar social reflex, before stepping out of frame and never reappearing, leaving behind a brief but weighty visual trace, capable of changing how an entire community understands the fragility of trust and the blurred line between safety and danger in the most seemingly normal moments. If this story has made you rethink those seemingly harmless moments in everyday life, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other cases where just one very small detail changed everything. Thank you for watching to the end, and we'll see you in the next video.